Hello everyone. This is a video overview of some things to keep in mind when you're having an AI conversation to get feedback on a draft. In this case, I'm using the example of the primary source literary paper over the short story In a Grove. And one of the first things you want to do is pick an AI platform. I generally prefer that students pick anything other than ChatGPT as the first choice, with the understanding that you can always get extra feedback from ChatGPT or Gemini or Claude. And I love ChatGPT. I have a paid subscription to it, but I also love the other platforms. And one of the things I want to do is expose students to other platforms that you may not have chosen to explore on your own. Claude is really good for things like feedback on a paper, and it's really good at following the rules that you set for it. The others are too, but Claude is especially good at following directions. Gemini is also very good and will give very good advice, but Gemini, out of all of them, tends to overstep, and it may not follow directions as closely in the beginning, so you kind of have to keep correcting it and telling it to follow the instructions that you gave it. But once it gets in the groove, then it can be very, very good, just like Claude can. And of course, ChatGPT is good. And all of the models have been upgraded, and they're just getting better and better all the time. Before we get started, and while I'm on that subject, one thing that you want to be careful about is make sure that you're on the highest model or one of the better models that you have available to you. Even on the free tiers, you have access to generally the higher models, and in some cases you have very limited access to the highest models, but you want to use the better ones, not the instant ones, not the ones that are at the lowest point on the totem pole. It does make a difference in terms of quality and accuracy, so just keep that in mind. There's usually a picker on there, and this one, Sonnet 5 for Claude, is really good. So if you're on Sonnet on Claude, you're good. If you're using Gemini, you want to be on Pro. Even if you're on the free tier, you have access to the Pro model, which is the top tier. You just won't get as many questions with it. But start on that. And same on ChatGPT. Don't use the instant. Don't use the baby one. Use the one that you have that has the highest reasoning capability on there, and follow best practices so you get more out of your sessions. So one thing to be aware of is that the more things that you upload into chat, the more it cuts into your context, and can actually shorten your questions in the free tiers, but you can still get a lot of mileage out of it. So I'm not saying don't upload things. I'm just saying that to be aware. Same thing with the length of your thread. The longer it becomes, I mean, they've got huge context now, so you really don't have to worry about it too much. But if you keep going on and on and on, and you have like a giant thread, just be aware that every time you ask a question, it's got to go back and read everything. So it's going to go back and read the PDF, it's going to go back and read this, it's going to go back, it's going to read all the interactions, all of the back and forth. And so the more it does that, at some point it'll go off the rails and it'll start to forget things. So there is kind of an optimum length. There's like what it can do and what you should do. And you can have a pretty long thread and still have it be pretty accurate and pretty good. But I'm just saying, keep that mindful. A couple of strategies to think about. You can, upload your documents first. You always want to upload your assignment sheet, the story, the essay that you're working with for context. And you need to decide on what you're going to, what your overall strategy is going to be. One is to have kind of like one overall tutoring session, if you will, where it's like, okay, I'm going to have a one-pass conversation with this AI platform about my draft based on what your concerns are, your questions are, and so on. Or you could choose things to focus on and break up your chats if you want to keep them shorter and more focused so that you don't get overwhelmed. So let's say, for example, maybe I have one thread for the intro and the conclusion, and I talk about those, and then maybe I have a thread for the body sections, and maybe that's where I'm doing the work there. But you want to look at those kind of things. Or maybe you want to focus on something specific like your quote integration that you're using. Maybe you want to, like, oh, let's look at the textual evidence that I'm using in the form of quotes, not just in terms of how it's cited, but if the quotes are well chosen, if you're leaving evidence on the table. So you get to choose what you're going to focus on, which is nice. All right, and before we dive into either one of these threads, some other best practices to keep in mind are to treat this like a conversation with another person. So don't treat it like an oracle that has all the right answers and assume that you have to do everything that it says. You don't, because the quality of the feedback depends more on you than it does on the AI platform. It depends on how well do you know the story. How well do you know your own argument that you wrote? How well do you know the requirements of the assignment, not only as stated on the assignment sheet, but also from the lessons? What do you know from the lessons? What do you know from the example files that I've given in there? And it's a good idea to let the AI platform, the chatbot, know that in addition to this context, you can supply other things, that your professors provided lessons, ask for specific things, or you also have other documents in the course that could be downloaded and provided if they're needed. And if they're not, obviously don't put them in because it eats up your context. But one of the first things that you want to do is you want to tell it, who you are in terms of this kind of thing. You're a student in a rhetoric class, and then you have to assign it a role. So you want it to act as a tutor or a thought partner in general, and you got to tell it what you want to focus on. So in this one, I say, help me identify gaps in my logic or evidence for my argument, things I need to shore up to make meaningful content-based revisions for draft 2. You also want to set guardrails. You want to set rules, like what it can do, what it can't do. So I always tell it, don't write anything for me or overstep by telling me what to argue, but do provide support when I need it. Ask me questions that send me to the text to defend my position more strongly, play devil's advocate to force me to think about things. So I'm doing these things because I want it to put me to work, because I'm asking it to help me, not to do it for me. So this is going to help me hopefully develop my thinking and also lay some ground rules so that the AI doesn't overstep. So I really want you to also look for evidence of drifting in your thread when you go back and look at it later. And drifting is when an AI platform goes from helping and following the rules that you established and overstepping and doing a bit too much, right? Because you're not going to learn and grow if somebody or something just does it for you. It's kind of like when you're a kid and you're learning how to tie your tennis shoe. Yes, maybe your mom shows you how to do it or your dad shows you how to do it. And then you practice, but if they keep just tying your shoes for you, you're never going to learn how to tie them on your own. So that's kind of the same principle we want here. We want help and guidance. We want conversational feedback. We also want to tell it, just like we do the tutors, don't focus on grammar at all. This is draft 1 of 3, and I need to focus on improving my argument. And the reason for that is you don't want to fiddle with or focus on grammar in a draft 1 when this thing is going to go through draft 2, and draft 3 is where you're really going to look at that. I mean, obviously if you start noticing some mistakes or typos or things like that, fix them as you see them, but you don't really have to focus on that yet, because what if you end up cutting out half of a paragraph or adding more? All that time you or the AI spends on fiddling with commas and semicolons or spelling, it could be wasted because it may be commenting on things that you end up cutting, and things like that. So never focus on that in the beginning of a draft. So let me scroll back up for the rest of that opening prompt, because there were a few more things that were there that I want to highlight. That first prompt is really important. Wow, I scrolled down kind of far. Here we go. Okay, and here's where I'm pointing out that I have other info. If the chatbot thinks that I need that, I said, let me know if you need more. If I don't remember something, I can look it up, but don't do that so much that we never get anywhere. And the reason why I said this is because in my first thread, using another student's paper, I I kind of locked down the rules so hardcore that it was really invoking them to an extreme, to the point where it was questioning or challenging everything. It was like, where does your professor say this? And it was like, and I had to tell it like, okay, look, loosen up a little bit. Don't be too crazy. But so then I kind of backed off in this one, and says, okay, let's do this, but let's keep the conversation going. Don't send me back to explain things that both you and I already know are true. So it's like a conversation. And what I forgot to do in this one that I didn't forget to do in the other one is I forgot to tell it how I wanted the conversation to go. Now, you have to develop your own preferences, but in general, I like for the threads that I ask students to produce to be conversational, at least in large part. Now, if there are other things that you like, if you like tables, if you like bullet points, if you like shorter answers, those kinds of things, absolutely say that, because you're the boss here. You get to say how you want the output because it's supposed to be useful for you. But I forgot to do that. And so what happened is it gave some praise. And remember that for this video, I pretended to be each of the students here. And, I kind of interacted as if I were the student and those were my papers. But I forgot to say that I wanted this to be a conversation, not to list a bunch of stuff at the beginning. But what did it do? It listed a bunch of stuff at the beginning. And so then I had to say, I forgot to mention, I wanted this to be more conversational because it's easier for me to process than you give me one, two, three, four, five things to think about, plus a couple of questions after that. But I did really like the questions. And then it asked me a question about the lessons, and I said, I don't know, let me go check her lessons. So then I pretended that I didn't know, and then I read them, and then I came back and I said, okay, this is what she said. And that could be valuable for some students because, again, when you are reading the lessons, it's easy for it in the moment for you to process them, but 3 days later maybe you don't remember all the minutia or whatever. So this actually was a good question that it asked me in this one. And I did open up the lesson, so I had a tab over here, and I looked at that, and I said, oh, now that I reread the part that the professor had on the introduction, I see that I need to redo mine. She says we need a hook, we need an introduction of the author and the name of the story, a brief overview of the story and the central mystery. So really specific stuff that needs to go into the introduction. And so by forcing me kind of back into that, I'm like, oh, I see, I need to redo that. So I already know that, and I can move on to something else. I already know what I need to do. So that can be useful too, because you've got the AI, you've got the context from the course, and the AI can also draw on the story. So I got off to a good start in this one, but I had to correct myself because I forgot to ask for things the way that I wanted it so that it wasn't just all at once. But what I did like about the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is that as a student, it also gave me some starting points. Like, oh, I really like that. Okay, let's talk about these one by one. And then it asked me to think about some stuff that the professor, me, said in the course. It's like, oh, she said not to do this. Why do you think she said that? And so why do you think she said don't list your reasons in the thesis for this paper? And so, again, just pretending to the students, I said, well, I think she probably said that because maybe it's formulaic and it can box you in. And, maybe that's something that's more characteristic of the younger grades. And, here are my 3 reasons and 5-paragraph essay and all of that. So, it kind of asked me, well, why do you think that? And, not that it's a quiz or a test or anything, but, what I like about that is maybe it's kind of drawing out like, oh, well, let's think about maybe why she might have said that and, the reasoning or the rationale behind that. And then since, the thesis has to be the last line of the first paragraph, and that was maybe missing in this part, it says, okay, so thinking about that, how could you boil that down? So then I gave it a sample thesis statement. I said, well, even though she's the least likely suspect, Masago is the true murderer. And, asking for feedback on that, and I get feedback on that, but then it asked me some questions, and I'm having some back and forth on that. So you get the idea, but it's asking me to kind of like really dig in deeper about the reasoning behind that, and it sends me back to the text. So I really loved this. And so I actually had another tab open over here with the PDF of the Grove article up, but I also have my hand annotated print copy, and I use that more often than anything else. And honestly, that's like easier and quicker for me to find things in, especially if it's a quote. I probably have the things I want to use marked, but you could also have it opened here, and you can, kind of quickly do a Control F search if you're like, oh, let me look for this part, or let me scroll to the part where, I need to be. And so it asked me some things that kind of made me go back to the text. And so then I started looking at, okay, well, this is what's making me think this. And I know this is too many quotes here, like stacked if I were writing a paper, but I'm really trying to be the student, and I'm going back to the text to find those things. Then I'm trying to like piece things together. So this should be useful, because if I were the student, I can go back, and it's helped me figure out what I would need to do to go back and shore up those things. And it's saying like, oh, look at the verbs that you found in there, and okay, the conclusions that you're drawing, okay, I see where you're going, and so on. So notice the back and forth, and notice as a student, I'm trying to hold my own. I'm not just like a passive recipient that's asking for everything that's quote unquote wrong with the essay for me to go quote unquote fix, because revision's not about fixing what's wrong necessarily. It's about taking what you have and seeing if you can make it better. And you don't have to treat or find everything under the sun. We're on such a short session in the summer session that you won't have time to revise, something in every single section probably. You do what you can. And so keep that in mind when you're having your conversations. So, when you have enough to go on, and in conjunction with your peer review, your tutor review, and most importantly, your own critical thinking, it's all of those things, but you're like the top banana, the boss that's getting to decide. So think about all these other sources as mechanisms for you to get feedback to consider, but you don't have to accept it all, right? You're going to decide what works, what doesn't, what you need to go back and look at, what you want to work on, and so on. But this is one of the best uses of AI, in my opinion. And for a lot of us, it takes practice to do this. So, you'll get better and better at it over time. It can be easy to defer to an AI platform and think of it as the expert and you as the novice or whatever, but you really have to have confidence in your own knowledge of the story, and use it to elicit things from you as much as you are trying to elicit some guidance from it. And I love, and when you do this, it'll say, oh, well, go look at this section again, and what does it actually say? And, so it forces you, and that's the kind of stuff that I do when I comment. I'm going to say, if you make a claim or you provide something or start to make an argument, I'm saying, okay, but based on what? Where in the, what are you hanging this on? And how can you connect the dots to explain your logic of how you're arriving at this? So you're kind of wanting to put it in that role. And then, the last thing that it said here, it gave me something good, but it kind of provided a little bit too much here. So I pushed back and I said, okay, I'll go back and I'll look at those things, but I want to point out that you overstepped a bit in that last bit. But the good part is that I still have to go back to the text and find those details to support it. But I wanted to let it know, because if we continued, I wanted to make sure that it was operating within the box and within the rules that I set for it, because I don't want it to overstep, because when it does, it can be really hard for you to see, and that's why I call it drift, because when something drifts from helping to doing, sometimes you don't notice it, and you're just, and it happens without you realizing it. So, and then it says, oh, fair point and noted, I'll hold back more. All right, and so I want to bounce over into the other thread just for a minute to show a couple of other things. Again, all the context is loaded. I have a front-loaded prompt that It's long and it may have been a little bit too detailed because boy did it follow to a T, and I had to um, let's see, I'm on the wrong one. Here we go. It followed it to the T, to the point where I had to say, okay, loosen up a little bit, and so on. But it's the same principle over here as well. These are the things that you want to keep in mind when you're having the feedback thread. Either break it up into isolated chunks so you're focusing on certain things, set that initial parameter. And I want to open up one other file, and I need to create a prettier looking handout for it. But just some reminders here of uploading the context, identifying your role as a student and being in a rhetoric class, and the task at hand, assigning the role and setting guardrails. What's your preference for the tone and output? Treat it like a conversation. Don't just be a passive recipient of it, and avoid asking for feedback just in one go and leaving it at that. It's not that you can't get good things from that, but then it's just too tempting to just be like, okay, it's a list, I'm gonna do, and there's no, I guess, invitation for you to explore further. So avoid just saying, oh, I want feedback. Watch for drift, and things like that. Those are just good practices. Now, sometimes I will provide a handout with sample questions, but one thing I want you to know, not only for this thread, but just in general, whether I provide you with the PDF of sample questions or whether I provide you with sample AI threads, the important thing to remember is that you shouldn't follow a script, because everybody's paper is different. Everybody's strengths are different. Everybody's arguments are different. What applies to your paper may not apply to everybody else's, and everybody's coming with a different level of knowledge and preparation for this assignment. Some students know the assignment really well and they process the lessons deeply, and they have that kind of stored in their recall. Other students might have to kind of go back and look things up, and so on. So one thing I want to avoid, and this is also especially to the two students who allowed me to use their drafts for the purpose of this video, certainly go back and look at the threads that are here and use whatever you find here that's useful. That's it. But don't just repeat this. Don't just like, okay, I'm going to open a thread and I'm going to ask the exact same questions that Mrs. Bell asked in this thread on mine. I mean, you can use them as a guide, you can use them as inspiration, especially for the first one. But when you go through, don't just, and I had this happen last semester when I asked for volunteers, and some people were like, oh, this is great, thanks so much. And instead of just using mine as one arm of the feedback, they just basically opened up another thread and asked the exact same questions and just repeated it, instead of having the experience of directing the conversation themselves, focusing on other things, and things like that. So that's true for the students who volunteered, but it's also true for the class, because you're going to have access to the threads. You've got access to this video as well. Use it as a guide, use it as an inspiration, but also think about what you know to be true about your arguments, about your level of confidence about specific aspects of it. Do set it up to elicit things from you, and then it kind of puts you to work. And if you do this right, this should actually be kind of fun and dynamic. It's not a static thing, and often students report that they like these kinds of interactions. Also, just be advised that your preparation and level of expertise in this is also vital, because sometimes it may misstate things, or it may say that you argued one thing and you're like, wait, I didn't say that, I didn't argue that, or you're misconstruing what I meant. And so do feel free to push back. It's necessary. One last thing that I almost forgot to mention is that also, when you're giving feedback, remember that all of these AI platforms, they are designed to be pleasing to the user. So if you're not careful, and if you don't tell it exactly what you want it to do, if you don't tell it to be honest or to tell you like it is, and I'm not saying that they're sentient and have concepts like honesty, but you know what I mean. So sometimes I'll tell students you have to give it permission to tell you what you need to hear and to offer constructive criticism or to elicit things from you, and not just to praise, because sometimes it will do that. It will overpraise, because who doesn't love that? And you don't want it to be a situation where you're not getting anything from it that is useful. All right, so those are the basic parameters, the basic idea for doing it. Again, you can choose any of the platforms, but I prefer that you choose Claude or Gemini as a first pass, and then you can always go back and choose ChatGPT as a second pass. Notebook LM is also good, but I don't know if you're familiar with that, and there's some things that are useful to know if you use that as well. So for this one, I would stick to Claude, Gemini AI, ChatGPT, and remember that you'll share the share links with those in addition to other things that I ask for in the evidence of feedback assignment, which I'll open so that you can see all the things that are required in there. And if you end up with more than one AI thread, just make sure that you include both of them or however many you have. All right, that's it. That's a wrap. I hope you have fun in doing this. And remember, the whole point is that you're doing this not just as a rote exercise, but you're doing this with the hope of eliciting some good things, not only from AI, but having AI elicit some good things from you that will help you in your revisions. Y'all have a great day, and don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions.